Hello, and welcome to Based on Facts, where fiction and superstition meet logic and scientific facts, on WELT 95.7 FM, broadcasting from the Allen County Public Library. This week's episode is going to be on the cost of education. I will be your host, Chris Rex, and I kind of been wanting to talk about this topic, really as it relates to the recent political races and such, just because of the fact that we just had Bernie Sanders officially get beaten by Hillary Clinton. As such, we have no longer the possibility of getting what Bernie wanted, which is to say he wanted free college tuition for a 4-year degree, essentially. And that really struck to heart with a lot of college students, obviously, because it would be nice to have that burden lifted off of them. And so that dream can no longer be realized with Bernie out of the race like that. Now, of course, he's going to probably try to go independent and still make his way on the presidential ballot, but not overly optimistic of his chances at that point, because we haven't seen that ever work in the past. But who knows? I don't know. Needless to say, I'm kind of considering it already done and over as far as that being a dream that would be realized. And I've come to terms with that. But a lot of people were kind of sitting here and throwing around this idea that Bernie was maybe aiming a little too high when he was trying to put forth this proposal and say that in addition to paying for years K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade, we can just tack on another 4 years and consider that as part of the public responsibility. And a lot of people had a lot of issues with this. They just couldn't see the numbers line up in an equitable way. Undoubtedly it's more expensive to put people through college than it is to put them through public school. And that comes down to a variety of reasons. We're going to talk about a few of those reasons as we go through this episode. But I just kind of want to break down some of the numbers and demographics for you so that we can kind of start piecing together this puzzle and seeing how equitable it would be in reality to fulfill this common good purpose. Because honestly, I am of the belief that the more educated a populace you have, the better off you are as a country. That is really what's going to help make and maintain make for a great country that continues to be great over time. Just as scientific advancements progress, maintaining that kind of heavy knowledge, depth of content, understanding, critical thinking, all this stuff, having all that in your population is really going to help you as a society overall, and really help us live up to our proclaimed status as being top dog in the world. And it's just when it comes to scientific progress, when it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare, we're kind of falling behind in a lot of these areas. And so it's great to see an effort to where we try to turn that whole thing around. I believe that part of that is to start at the ground level, start with the education. You get an educated populace, you can then develop everything else from there. You can develop a lot of talent, you can develop a lot of technology, a lot of science, and everything else will just flourish from there. Because as we've seen, it's much easier for people to be good at what they do and to have the time and effort put toward hobbies and such. To have that kind of enjoyment from life, you really have to start at a high point in the first place. So you have to start by securing some of your basic needs. Now, obviously, we here in the U.S., we don't have a problem with food so much for the most of us, just because, honestly, a lot of the U.S. is overweight, including myself. So I'm definitely not apart from that category by any means. But once we take care of some of these basic needs like food, shelter, companionship, just worrying about safety, things like that, then you can start really developing as a culture. You can start increasing the amount of time you spend on the arts, on the environment, on community outreach, on volunteer efforts, things like that. You can really only do once you're at kind of a high level to start with. And what helps that is science and technology and just developing things that really help make your life easier. And how we get to that place is through education. Making sure that you know and understand everything that we already should know. That way we can move forward from there, from a knowledgeable standpoint. Otherwise, we're just sitting here flailing our arms around trying to reinvent the wheel because we don't understand what's already been done. And that's what limits technological progress. So, if we can get to this point where we finance education beyond the high school level, we can start to really see some societal rewards from that, I would think. But the question is not whether we should do that. It's whether we can do that, fiscally speaking. And so if we start to break down the demographics of the US, we'll notice that about 23% of the United States is under the age of 18. Okay, that's about 73 million people. And we're already paying roughly, let me see, actually, this year's budget is $42 billion. Okay, $42 billion for 73 million people to put them in 1 year through K through 12 education. All right. Now, unfortunately, that's been kind of bumping around recently. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but Congress has been cutting into that a bit, including into some of the Obama initiatives, which was trying to counteract these cuts. 2011, we were actually spending $44 billion on K through 12 education, and it dipped down to $37 billion in the time since then, through 2015, which is a 20% decrease. Okay, that's pretty sizable. All right, that's where you start seeing teacher layoffs. You're starting to see programs being shut down in these schools, and that's really unfortunate. Especially since, if anything, we need more education right now than anything else, and it's really unfortunate to see those cuts. Luckily, with this fiscal year, like I said, the amount almost bumped back up to what it was in 2011. It's now $42 billion, so that's great. We're almost back up to where we were. So that's on the rise again. That's fantastic. Now, here in the U.S., we have a total of about 319 million people. Let's just say 320 for sake of argument. And we want to kind of see how much of that population is going to college. Okay, and obviously predominantly it's going to be the people that are fresh out of high school, those that are aged 18 to 24. Okay, and of those 320 million people, we have about we have a number of them in this 18 to 24-year-old category, and that amounts to about 13 million people. So 13 million, that's probably about less than 5% of the population, the total population, and that's pretty good. That's a pretty good starting point. So we have 13 million people that are trying to go to college, fresh out of high school, essentially, and get a 4-year degree. As such, we can start to figure, well, how much really would it cost to put those 13 million people through college? Okay. Now, we can consider certain other things like, tuition and how much that costs. We can consider cost of living and how much that costs. But for the sake of argument, let's just limit it to tuition costs. All right. And the average cost for tuition at a 4-year university, in-state tuition, is about $10,000 a year. Okay, that's pretty mind-boggling, really, when you consider some of these federal loan programs that only loan out $8,500 a year. I mean, those two numbers just don't quite add up to me. But I digress. So let's say $10,000 a year for tuition. Now, obviously, it's not including books or, like I said, cost of living, apartment, or whatever. So just for straight up tuition, tends to be around $10,000. If you take that and consider that, most of these students are going to be going for a 4-year degree, so they'll be in school for 4 years. So that's $40,000 per person. All right. Now we take that $40,000 per person and multiply it by the 13 million people that are trying to go to college. And you end up with a total number of around $520 billion. And at that number, you're like, oh my gosh, that is insane. That is such a huge amount to throw out all at once. And you're right, that absolutely is. Compared to the $40-ish billion that we're spending on K through 12 education, absolutely, 520 is a huge number. However, let's consider a couple things here. One is that $520 billion is actually about the amount that we add to our federal deficit every year. So let's consider that first. Aside from that, let's also consider that we're talking about paying for all 4 years of college for all of these kids in this category all at once. All right. So if we break it down by years, we were saying 4-year college, $10,000 a year. So let's break it down into a fourth. Okay, that gives us $130 billion a year for the 4-year degree. For everyone in that age category right now, that much is going to be spent. Now, if we take that a step further and consider that we're actually encompassing a whole lot of kids all at once, as opposed to doing them grade by grade, like what we would normally be doing. Okay, so right now we're considering 7 different age groups. Okay, age 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24. 7 different age groups. We're going to educate them all at once and pay for all of it up front. That's not how this works. So typically what you'd see a yearly cost, just like with the K through 12. Okay, so we'd have to take our 130 billion, and divide it by 7 to get the cost per year of educating these kids. And so we end up with a figure around $20 billion. Now that doesn't sound too bad. That sounds like a 50% increase to our current spending for K through 12, which is sizable. Okay, don't get me wrong, that is sizable. But considering the downstream effects of that, I think that that's pretty doable. An extra $20 billion a year to secure everyone with a 4-year college degree, that actually sounds pretty good to me. I mean, especially, like I said, considering that we're adding $500 billion a year to the national debt, I really think $20 extra billion a year is a drop in the bucket. Especially saying is we're not talking about loans, we're not talking about grants. All that stuff can stay in place. Okay. And honestly, if you're having the whole country pay for stuff, you can direct those types of activities towards helping students pay for their cost of living, helping them pay for the books and whatnot. So we can actually redirect those costs to provide even more buffer for kids during that time. And that's outstanding. Extra $20 billion a year to help support people, get them those jobs that they need and want, and that will help bring us all up as a society. I think it's really worth it. That's an exciting concept to me. Now, other people will take a look at this and be like, well, I don't really feel comfortable with my tax dollars going towards some namby-pamby 18-year-old who can't pay for his own college. And it's like, well, I understand your concern about your tax dollars. Okay. But, like I said, when we're looking at a number that is not even 1%, or I'm sorry, it's not even, it's 5%. It is a number that is 5% of what's being added to the national debt every year. I think that's pretty good, honestly. And so I really don't see that as being a huge concern when you're talking about your tax dollars and you're talking about maybe an extra 5 cents. Just that's going to national debt. I'm not even talking about how much the country actually brings in, because that becomes a real drop in the bucket. But the point is that even if you want to consider, oh, well, we don't want to continue getting so much into debt, well, yeah, that's not going to do anything. Okay, that amount is just completely insignificant compared to where we're going to be going with this kind of education as our backbone. That is just such a powerful driver of innovation and reaching towards a brighter future for everyone in this country. That I'm pretty sure you can do away with the maybe 2 cents on the dollar for funding somebody's education. Okay, I think that's doable, and especially when we consider the direction that we're trying to head with healthcare. Not really going to get into that, but I mean, we've definitely seen that it's possible for countries to cover the healthcare costs of its citizens in a socialized healthcare kind of marketplace. And honestly, there are certain advantages to things like that, to that kind of centralization and widespread coverage of certain services that really should be the right of all citizens. Okay, should be the right of all citizens to get health care. To have a healthy populace is to have a happy populace. That is nice and productive, goes to work more often than not, and spends a nice long life. Long into their 80s. That's where you see a burst in the economy. Okay, you don't see a boost in the economy by people dying at age 40. All right, that's just, that used to be the way of humans, but then we developed technology, so we doubled our lifespan. That's incredible. But the only way that we can go further from the here and now is to develop that kind of technology in science and medicine to be able to keep growing older, being healthier, curing cancer, treating cancer. All these things that we're currently fighting right now in order to try to develop into the awesome civilization that we know that we can be. It's going to take a communal effort. And I understand, you as an individual, that you want to hold on to every single penny that you can. I understand that. But the issue is, there are many things that you do or that you want to do that involve the work of somebody else. And if that somebody else is either A, not there at all, or B, untrained, you're going to have a bad time. Okay, just to go back to a South Park episode I just watched. All right, it's this kind of communal thought to where we start considering the effects of other people on our lives. We realize that every single thing that we do, every single day, either impacts somebody else or is impacted by somebody else. And so this whole survivalist mentality of, oh well, I'm just out in the world to get what's mine and screw everybody else. That doesn't work very well, especially in today's society. And what you're seeing is a bleeding of those lines of individuality as we try to work towards what's best for the common good. And I'll tell you what, I personally believe, not to say that I'm biased or that I'm a teacher or anything, I personally believe that education is something that is for the common good. It is something that benefits everyone at all times. You know, some people may sit here and denigrate certain majors over others. I mean, I know that I do it myself. When I hear of people getting a master's degree and they don't have to go through a thesis, I have issues sometimes understanding how that's equivalent to my degree with a thesis, but that gets into nitpickiness, and I really just more have fun picking on people and having them pick on me, so there's that to consider. But the overall point is that really I just see as a society us benefiting from spending an extra $20 billion a year to pay for somebody's education. Because really all we're going to do is benefit in the end. I think that was an awesome goal of Bernie Sanders. It was really bold of him to bring that up. You know, I honestly feel like that was kind of the next step after Obama's healthcare stuff, kind of getting us in the step of to step in the direction of socialized healthcare. The next step, logically speaking, was to target education and to get us moving along those lines so that we have an educated populace as well as a healthy populace. And that's just, I think that's incredible. Now, some people might start looking at some of these situations and looking at how much it really costs for education and start asking questions like, why does the tuition hike up so much every single year? And you know what? I wondered that myself, because being a college professor, I don't tend to see too much of those tuition hikes in my paycheck. And generally speaking, in the places I've been, teachers only get raises every 5 years or maybe more. And so tuition hikes every single year just don't seem to make sense from the salary point of view, from me being a teacher, because I'm surely not seeing that money. Not for many years, and many percentage increases later on down the line. So it's difficult for me to understand where all that money's going. So I did a little research, and I saw that the average tuition hikes up by about 5% per year. And that's actually a decent amount, to be honest. That's a good APR percentage rate there. And what's interesting is that if you break down the professors and how their salaries go up, you see that on average their salary goes up 2, maybe 3% per year. Okay, which is to say about half the rate of tuition increase. Now what's interesting is that when you actually look at how much of that tuition cost goes to the professors, it's only 31%. So you're thinking, okay, less than a third of the tuition goes to your professor. The other bit of your tuition goes to every other cost of the university. So what is it then that's driving these prices? If only a third of this price hike is due to the professors, why so much of a hike over such a short period of time? That just didn't make sense to me. It's still something that kind of confounds me. Now, part of that, we can kind of look at some of this, like what I said with the K through 12 education and how some of the cuts have been made there, budget cuts have been made there over time. We've also been seeing cuts at these state and federal levels from universities and colleges to get public funding going to support tuition at those places. And those types of fundings have been cutting over the years recently as well. So that definitely explains part of what's going on there. And that seems to explain about 30% of the tuition hike is simply due to the fact that they've lost 30% of their funding. So that's where some of that funding comes from, or some of that increased tuition hike comes from. The other part of it seems to kind of get lost in the confusion. Okay, so we basically have 30% of your tuition going towards professors. And then we have the increase every year, about 30% of that increase being explained by lack of funding. Okay, so that explains maybe 1.5% of the 5% increase. So what about the other 3.5% increase? What's explaining that? That's what I lose sleep over and try to wonder what's going on here. That seems to be quite a lot. That's almost unaccounted for, basically. And so after digging a little bit, it seems that a decent portion of that is definitely going towards administrative officials and increasing their salaries, which apparently raise at about 4 times the rate of the professors. Now, understandably, there are definitely fewer admins, so the overall impact really isn't as great. But still, considering that, professors are getting a raise about 2% every year, and then you have an admin official who's getting a raise of 8% a year, that kind of bothers me to know that they're getting such a raise every year, because they're probably already getting a sizable amount of money compared to any professor anyway. And on top of that, they're going to get much larger raises every year. That bothers me a little bit. Now, of course, some of this stuff is hitting home here in Fort Wayne a little bit. Concerns over money and budgetary issues. I'm not really going to cover it in this episode because honestly I'm kind of ignorant on the issue. But through the grapevine, I've heard this rumor that IPFW is going through a change. And in this change, they are wanting to really reconfigure how they do the college. They're considering getting rid of some programs and departments and professors, and that kind of bothers me. Especially when I hear rumors that the people making these budgetary decisions are not even the people in the departments that are being cut, which kind of does nothing but spell bias to me. But like I said, I'm not going to get too much into that now. The overall point is that there definitely seems to be a lot of budgetary conflict when it comes to a lot of these different colleges. And it's hard to understand exactly where all that money is going. Don't know. Because it certainly isn't going into my pocket. The vast majority of it, that's for sure. So, very, very interesting, just kind of looking at that dynamic there. Alternatively, I would kind of beg the question as to, if we're having increased college attendance, all right, obviously you're going to need more buildings, more space, more janitors, more admin officials to process more students, and of course more teachers as well to teach more of the students. But if we're just seeing attendance increase over time, that alone should be bringing in more money to the university. But we're also seeing increased tuition hikes of 5% per year. So you're almost having like a double whammy effect, basically, to where you have more students charging them more money. And where's all that money going? Because a lot of these universities, they honestly remain pretty stable for a period of time until they build a new building. And then that's when they shell out millions and millions of dollars to do so. And then they reap the rewards from it from that point. But a lot more often than not, you're not seeing a renovation every single year. You're not seeing a new building every single year. And so, certainly you're going to have to save up some money for some period of time to build a building. But you're still begging that question, where is all that money going? Because all you're just seeing is this huge influx of money. And then it kind of trickles out in the various areas that it's obligated to go in, leaving the rest of the areas kind of wondering what happened. If you're having record attendance and record high tuition, but yet you're cutting professors and cutting departments, those two things don't seem to make sense to me. Especially when the departments that you're cutting are actually bringing money into the institution beyond what it costs to maintain them. Okay, and we'll see that as being an additional dynamic to some of these different universities as well. It's very interesting stuff. I'll talk about it on another episode when I actually know a little bit more about it. But I guess my big thing is just it's very difficult to calculate the exact downstream benefits of education. And in my classes, what I like to do is I try to emphasize critical thinking and understanding and conceptualization of larger, broader concepts. I mean, certainly it's great to know the fine details, be able to regurgitate those. I mean, that's certainly important. That's kind of the foundation for everything. But teaching students that higher level thinking, beyond regurgitation of facts, that's where you have magic happening. That's where you encourage that creativity that really taps into the uniqueness of the human mind, and making it really just makes the possibilities endless. Whether we're talking about maybe an engineer, helping get them thinking along the right lines, whether you're talking about even somebody like a nurse, and getting them to kind of think outside the box and try to conceptualize 10 different scenarios instead of just 3 different scenarios as far as what might be going on with this particular patient and how to treat them accordingly. Having that extra level of dynamic will help you. If you're in the hospital and you present with some symptoms that could be a number of different things, it's great to have a nurse that has a clue and can help diagnose you and treat you accordingly. That's just a benefit you're going to get on a regular basis just by going to your medical professionals. Alternatively, we could talk about things like, my favorite field, science. You talk about somebody going into a lab and trying to find a cure for colon cancer, so to speak. It's great to have somebody who's used to thinking kind of outside the box, or at least having a lot more of that higher order thinking going on, because that's going to help them make a much more breakthrough discovery that can actually help a lot more people than just a person who's like, oh, well, I know every single cancer, and I know what causes each one of them, and that's great. That's certainly what you need to know, but being able to think beyond that and to think of the different ways that you can counter those various kinds of cancer, that's what's going to be important. That's what's going to lead to innovation. And it's an innovation that we need right now. That's what's going to make America great again, is innovation. Getting back to our roots of, being the home of the cotton gin, having telephone lines all over the country, all these different innovations that we had here in the U.S., the atomic bomb, all these different things that we did here, and that we've done as much as several decades ago. It's just lately it's been hard for us to kind of keep up with that kind of high level innovation. Whether we're talking about cell phones or whatever. I mean, we're doing okay, but we're certainly not the top of the world when it comes to automobiles, and that's sad. This was where the automobile started, with Henry Ford. But yet, you see the best automobiles when you look at overall ratings. At least the last time I checked, they were Toyota and Honda. How is that? We started the thing. Shouldn't we be the best at manufacturing vehicles? Apparently not. Apparently we have been slacking on that. And that's the kind of thing that we need to go back to. Look at our space program. Our space program is a mess. We retired the space shuttle, and yet we had nothing to replace it. That was about the dumbest decision ever. Now we have to rely on the Russians or the Chinese other people to send our people up into space. Because we were too stupid to figure it out, apparently. Because we decided to just keep cutting NASA funding and not giving them the ability to create something as a replacement for the space shuttle. So now we have all these people that want to go into space and a way to get them there. Good job. Because when we look at NASA overall in the country, we see that every bit of money that we put into that place, every dollar we put into that place, we get about $10 back in benefits to society. And we see that a lot with education. We see a much higher benefit than the cost when it comes to education. It's the same thing. Because, you see all these programs on TV, reality programs, and you're like, oh my gosh, these people clearly dropped out when they were in 10th grade, never even graduated high school, and they have no clue what they're talking about. They can't form a sentence to save their lives. They can't spell to save their lives. And they are just ignorant as all get out. And it doesn't help, honestly, when we have celebrities perpetuating certain myths. That certainly doesn't help either. We have celebrities going on television and saying, oh, well, vaccines cause autism. And it's like, oh, well, no, they don't. They never have. They never will. There was never any evidence to suggest that. You were just ignorant. If you knew how to read, you would know better. So if we can increase our education, we can not only have higher quality television that's maybe not so trashy and unintelligent. I just feel like my brain is melting when I'm watching those shows, which, don't get me wrong, can be nice sometimes. Sometimes my brain needs to melt a little bit. But when that's predominantly what's on TV all the time, that really just, oh my gosh, it just irks me. It's so frustrating to see that the American public has become almost exactly what we would have predicted in, Idiocracy, that movie. We're seeing a very simplified mindset that is highly emotional and prone to anger and outrage over nothing. You look at some of these events lately and you see just the most wild responses from people. We talked about the Harambe controversy last week, and you look at that and people were just all up in an outroar. I mean, yeah, I was upset too, but goodness gracious, some people just go over the top. It's like, dude, calm down, take a breather, you'll be fine. Okay, the world will go on. We just have to learn to take some sort of message away from these incidences and use it to prevent further incidences like this. But to sit there and get so angry and just want to go out and harm people because of this, where some people were like, well, I was kind of wishing they shot the mom. Well, come on, man. Okay, you can call her parenting skills into question all you want. That's legit, all right? But to sit there and wish death upon her, that's a bit extreme. Because then you got to think about everybody else involved in the equation. Think about her kids. Think about her family. Think about her husband if she had one, Got to think about all these things because life is just so complex. And it's that kind of notion that we really need to have more of. More consideration of all these different factors that can be involved. Because if we have a very considerate human populace, we will definitely see the rewards of that later on down the line. Not to mention, we've definitely shown, just looking at trends in other countries, including this one, we've seen that the more education people have, the more likely they are to put off having children. Instead of having a child when you're 18, maybe since you're going to college, you'll put it off until you're 23. And well established with a nice job. And by doing that, what you're going to do is you're going to reduce the amount of people who are reliant upon welfare, who are reliant upon these systems that are put in place to help poor mothers or poor families. If you have less reliance on those systems, more self-reliance when it comes to having a job, guess what? We can decrease the funding for those areas and use it to help buffer some of the costs of putting these kids through college in the first place. Let's say we end up having to cut the welfare by half. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, we end up cutting welfare by $10 billion a year. Just because we're putting more kids through college, they're putting off having kids until later in life, and once they do have the kids, they can support them themselves. So they don't just become a permanent parasite on all of society. And then you start to think, well, heck, if we save $10 billion a year from less welfare, that can buffer half of the cost of putting these kids through college. So now we have $10 billion that we're spending as opposed to $20 billion a year. And so now you're thinking, well, that's sounding pretty good. I think that's doable. And then you start considering the other downstream effects here. You're like, well, if we have people putting off childbirth until they can sustain it themselves, well, we can also see them having fewer children. Because that's another thing that we see, is that with higher education, not only do you put off having a kid until you're much older, but you also have fewer children once you reach that point. And we see an increased incidence of people not having kids at all. And that all comes down to education. And you may sit here and think like I've heard a number of economists say, like, oh my gosh, well, if people start having too few kids, well, our economy is going to collapse. I was like, well, no, it's not. Okay. The population will continue growing and continue growing and continue growing because it's human population. And they're not very good at regulating their own growth. Okay. So even if we reach, among Americans, reach a point where births equal deaths, and actually deaths start to exceed the births, which is to say that the Native American population starts shrinking, we still have a bunch of immigrants coming into this country and becoming citizens. So we will always be growing in population. There will never be a time where we will be decreasing population. It will always be increasing. So even from an economist's perspective, there's no concern about that. Because if anything, we want fewer leechers, so to speak, fewer people on welfare, which will increase the amount of funds that we have available to do other things. And that's where we should try to be putting this emphasis. Because if you can get a good job where you make enough money to support yourself, your wife, your 2 kids, then you know what? That's outstanding. And we need to encourage that. Because that's just that much less money that the government has to put forth to try to support your family. Every year I have to sit here and kind of hold my tongue and roll my eyes sometimes at some of the things that my sister ends up getting from the government, because she's kind of turned into a baby factory of sorts. She just had her 4th child not too long ago, and I cringe when I think about how she's on partial disability, and really she's pretty capable of working. She's worked before in the past. And she's kind of using this partial disability because she has a pacemaker as an excuse to not have to work at all. When clearly she's capable of doing some degree of work. So that's just frustrating to me, seeing the welfare that she gets, the tax credits, Medicare that she gets. Seeing those expenses from the government to her, it kind of bothers me. And I would like to see her be a little bit more self-reliant in some ways, but fortunately she does have a husband that does work and does help support the family. It's just she's still getting a lot of breaks and credits because she has 4 kids and she's on partial disability. I'm not saying anything about people who are on disability. Disability is disability, that's fine, but my sister is surprisingly capable for being on partial disability. So, especially since she keeps having kids, which indicates that her heart must not be too horribly off, or else she wouldn't keep having kids, because that's pretty hard on your heart. Being pregnant, going through that process, whatever. Yeah. Anyway, I digress. Going back to the main topic, I'm just seeing that investing in education is never a bad gamble. Never. Whether we're talking about investing in K through 12, which is of course great, should be very much prioritized. Definitely a lot of great things can come from that. It absolutely shocked me to learn that funding has decreased for that over previous years, because it's really where we need to start. We need to start with a strong foundation in these kids, because by the time they get to college, if they're not ready, they're not going to do well. And just based on my previous experience as a college professor, and communicating with some other college professors that have crunched some data, it seems that college performance of students is going down. Okay, we're having a lot more poorly performing students in classes, and we're having a much higher dropout rate of students from classes. And so what we're seeing is we're seeing this dynamic where more people are going to college, but it seems that more of them are not prepared for college once they get there. So I believe that it's great to sit here and say, well, we should fund college for everyone. That's excellent. But let's not forget about the first step. Okay? We should also increase funding for K through 12, because we have to get them ready for college. We see this dynamic within the classroom where you have a kid that's balancing 4 to 8 different classes, which can be a lot when you're meeting every single day. He's trying to balance that much work, and he's also trying to go to certain after-school activities, maybe sports or whatnot, and then he's trying to maybe do some volunteer work or intern someplace, try to get some experience, get some resume buffer there. And it's just, there's so much pressure on these kids. It's really hard for them to focus on the important thing, which is the next step in their lives. Okay, which is performing in college once you get there. It's just so much of their effort is just built in trying to get into college. Prepare for the ACT or the SAT. Prepare to take those tests. They're the entrance tests for colleges. Just all this preparation just to get into the college, but once they're there, they're almost clueless in some cases. Who are just like, oh my gosh, well, what am I going to do now? I've done all this effort just to get here. Now I'm here. My gosh, what do I do? Because all of a sudden they're throwing these classes that move real quick. All right, these are classes that just go boom, 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 boom. Just throw all this information at them in such a small amount of time, expect them to be able to retain it like a sponge. I'll admit, I'm guilty of this myself, especially this summer. I'm teaching a human physiology and anatomy class, and I have to throw a lot of information at the students, especially since this is a summer class. I mean, my gosh, they have to learn in 8 weeks what they would normally be expected to learn in 16 weeks, and that's just, my gosh, that's a whole lot of information. I mean, yeah, you're only talking about 13 chapters, but still, that's a lot to process, especially when you consider the fact that it's a biology class. And as any biology class is, you have a lab component for the class, which is to say, you have basically half your time spent in lecture, the other half the time spent in lab. Then you have the extra time outside of class to study for the lecture and for the lab. So by taking one class, you're really taking 2 classes. And that's something a lot of people don't understand when they get to college, because they're so used to this high school atmosphere where everything is so integrated and seamless that they don't realize that things start to really separate out in college. You may have lecture on Tuesday and then lab on Thursday. And you're going to have to get used to that, because Thursday, that's going to suck. Okay, I mean, sure, you don't have to worry about studying PowerPoints or whatnot, but you know what? You're going to have to worry about that lab report or studying those specimens or whatever it is in order to get that grade, because if you don't pass the lab, you don't pass the course. In other cases, the lab is actually a separate course from the initial course, and that makes it a little easier for you. That way, if you don't pass the lab, then you don't necessarily fail the lecture as well. So there are some cases where they kind of divide them out, and that's nice and convenient. But really, it's just this whole dynamic, all these different things that are going on. I'm seeing a lot of students not being prepared for it by the time they graduate high school. And as such, I think that should be one of our priorities, is to kind of educate the primary and secondary schools a little better. So if we just throw more money at those programs, at those different things, we can definitely see an increase in student performance, as well as an increase in the number of graduates that we end up with at the end. So we can actually have an educated populace that's not just trolling around on Facebook, shouting out unintelligible sentences about this, that, and the other, whatever thing they decide to rant about this week. It's much better to sit here and try to generate a populace that is knowledgeable, that is informed, that has some idea of how to kind of research information and find out the facts behind things, as opposed to just going off their emotions and ambitions and just willy-nilly spewing whatever filth decides to come out of their mouth at that time. So it's really advantageous to see us try to invest in a future where we have a lot more educated people, because along with education we see a lot more of a calm mindset typically. Okay, we see people start to let go of some of their emotional kinds of aspects, personality-wise, and start to become a little bit more cool and calm and collected, because in the classroom, when you're going through and getting this education, you're expected to have some sort of composure to you. Okay, you're expected to have some sort of responsibility, and it's that responsibility that helps shape you and round you out as an individual. And we're definitely seeing that more often, that with the more education you have, the more calm, cool, and collected you are, the more intelligent you appear to be, not only online, but in person when interacting with you. If you can sit here and carry on a conversation and actually sound like an informed individual, that is definitely a benefit not only to you, but to everyone around you. Otherwise, people are just kind of rolling their eyes, kind of walking away, and they're just like, oh my gosh, don't know one of those people. It's like straight from a reality show, right? But yeah, so I mean, I really don't see any downsides to investing in education. And I honestly think that I would have the same opinion even if I wasn't from a biased perspective. I mean, I think I've retired from K through 12 education. I don't think I'm ever going back to that. There was too much politics involved. A lot of interplay between the parents and the students and the admins. Just a lot more oversight than I really desired. So I don't think I'm ever going to go back to that in my life. I'm going to try to stick with the college level. Really appreciate the college level. It seems to be very mature compared to the high school level. And I really appreciate that. And I'd kind of like to see that more mature behavior in my students. When they get an F on their assignment, to not have them just come up to me and shout out why they get an F on the assignment. More often than not, college kids will know exactly why they got an F on that assignment. Okay. Now, obviously you have some bad apples that may try to start some stuff, especially when you catch them cheating, funny enough. Nobody really appreciates that, but needless to say, you do have that increased maturity level, at the college level. It's not quite to the point where it should be. We're still seeing a number of child mentalities leaching into college when really they should be more mature by that point. And so that's another thing that I'd really like to see schools have the funding to deal with, as far as trying to work on people being socially ready to handle college, to have that kind of grown-up mentality, to be able to go into a situation, take responsibility for your actions and for your grade, and being able to, function as an independent adult. Because I've seen a number of college students that won't even really clean their apartment or dorm room, and it's just, they live like pigs. They don't even pick up after themselves. That's just terrible to me. I don't understand how that happens, but needless to say, you have a number of these college students that can't even take care of themselves. And it's apparent when they step into your classroom. So you're like, oh my gosh, you can't handle yourself at home, can't handle your grades here. You need to grow up. I'm sorry. You need to grow up a bit. And perhaps the hard knocks of life will help teach you that. But certainly my classroom is not the place. I'm sorry. It's just, I have a lot of stuff to do as it is. It's hard for me to focus on getting your maturity up, as well as your knowledge and comprehension level of the topic increased as well. So I think that'll about cover it for my rant on cost of education and maybe some of the benefits of education along the way. Just kind of showing that I really think that society benefits when we have an educated populace. And if everybody chips in, a nickel or a couple pennies to do that goal, I really don't see the harm in that. Especially when we're already financing so much public school at the K through 12 level. So, really don't think it's much of a step to start covering some college costs as well. But needless to say, that'll probably never happen, like I said, because Bernie is probably out of the race for president anyway. But it does seem like it'd at least be a feasible option. So, thank you for listening to Based on Facts. You can find every one of our episodes on Facebook or YouTube just by typing in Based on Facts into the search bar. This is Chris Rex, and thank you for listening. Have a great day.